You're about to listen to a BBC podcast, and maybe it's one I had a hand in. I'm Tammy Walker, and I produce podcasts for the BBC. My role is to give new and diverse creators a voice with the opportunity to build a career. That's the thing I love about podcasts. You start with just a good idea, but then you have the space to see where it goes. And doing that at the BBC means we can really run with the best stories while developing the most unique audio talent. So if you like what you hear, why not check out the huge range of podcasts we've got on BBC Sounds?
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to a hastily reconvened edition of the Scottish Football Podcast. It's Wednesday the 31st of January. I'm Alasdair Lamont, and as we re-record, it's just been confirmed that Barry Robson and his assistant Steve Agnew have left Aberdeen. It comes following a 1-1 home draw with Dundee.
Bojan Miovski, Aberdeen's number 9 and start of the season, left-footed, scores! Bottom right corner! It's headed down and in, Dundee level! Lee Ashcroft scores! And Nick Walsh blows for full time, and listen to the reaction from the Aberdeen supporters. A really poor performance. And what will this mean for Barry Robson?
This is the Scottish Football Podcast.
So what next for the Dons? To discuss that, I am joined again by BBC Scotland's chief sports writer Tom English and Gary Scott, who is the co-host of the ABZ Football Podcast, a Dons fan, clearly. So I'll come to you first, Gary, for your initial reaction. I should make it clear to listeners that we were discussing, obviously, all of this, or at least the result and so on, earlier in the morning when Barry Robson was still in a job. I don't think this news has come as a particular surprise to you then, has it?
No, I mean, I think we discussed it when we signed off about the fact that we might need to reconvene again later in the course of the day, given the news that was starting to break in the Northeast already. And I think, as I said in the earlier recording, it had been the case of when and not if, as far as Barry Robson's future at Aberdeen was concerned. So no, not a massive shock at all today.
Tom, before I come to you, let me just read a bit of a fairly lengthy statement that Aberdeen have issued late this morning. So they talk about the club having invested heavily to rebuild the squad during the summer and help produce some extremely credible European performances and progression to the Viaplay Cup final in December. They go on to say, however, league results and performances over the course of the 2023-24 campaign have been well below the expectations set. Following our failure to defeat Dundee at Pittodrie last night, the decision was taken to replace the management team. Then there's some quotes from the chairman, Dave Cormack, who talks about being a difficult call. He says Barry earned the right to be Aberdeen manager and knew the high level of expectation we had when he took the role. We gave him as much time and support as we possibly could in the hope and expectation he could return us to the league form we witnessed in the spring of last year. Clearly, that hasn't happened. With 17 games left, he goes on to say, in the league and still in the Scottish Cup, this change is necessary to help us refocus on our ambitions for the rest of the season. Tom, what's your take on the situation overall?
You were saying to Gary there, was it a surprise? And I would say no and yes. No, in the sense that it had to happen. I think it's 12 wins, or it was, when you speak past tense now, was 12 wins in 39 games, which is clearly nowhere near good enough. And if they were to continue on their points per game total for the rest of the season, they were on course for about 43 points, which over the last 4 or 5 seasons would have got them 9th or 10th place. This is a club that has invested quite heavily in Scottish football terms. Mm-hmm. Top 6 is the bare minimum. Like, that's break even. That's non-negotiable. For them to be outside of the top 6 would be just ridiculous. And that's where they were heading. So no, it's not a surprise in that sense. Yes, it is a surprise in a sense that as recently as Saturday night, after the defeat at the weekend, senior sources of the club were saying they were going to give Barry Robson time, that he deserved the opportunity and would be given the opportunity to push on for 4th place, which was a target, and a cup run. Now, obviously, the draw last night has pushed everyone over the edge. So they're back now where they were numerous times before. I mean, Barry Robson, I think he's 31% win return, albeit there's some European games in there, so you have to factor that in, which is worse than Jim Goodwin, which is worse than Stephen Glass. they are almost addicted to appointing unsuccessful managers right now at Aberdeen. And I'd say their confidence at board level, having struck out 3 times in a row, must be pretty low.
Before we kind of look at the future for Aberdeen and indeed Barry Robson, just going back to last night, Gary, there was a cacophony of boos at the end of the game. I think a fan protest was organised for afterwards as well, almost regardless, I think, of what the result had been last night. Was there a sense of inevitability about the departure of Barry Robson, whether it had been today or sometime in the pretty near future?
For me, the writing's been on the wall since probably October, November, that this was the trajectory that Robson was on. I think with the vast majority of the fans, that probably really came home to roost. Probably either the Kilmarnock home defeat in early December or the 3-0 defeat to St Mirren at home just at the end of the year. I think those were probably the tipping points for the vast majority of the support. And the support, I think, were concerned that basically exactly what has now happened was going to manifest itself, that we would stumble along for another few weeks. It would become untenable at some point. That was always going to happen. But once again, similar to last year, we're now a day away from the transfer window closing and we've sacked our manager. What does that kind of say about the strategy and the thinking at board level and above the manager's seat?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Tom, because Dave Cormack, who pulls the strings, is a highly successful businessman, knows what he's doing in that regard, how to run a company. Alan Burrows has gone in there as chief executive, a guy who is pretty well considered in the Scottish game. I think we both know him reasonably well and would say he seems like a good operator. And yet, as Gary says, they have to carry at least some of the can here, don't they?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, Dave Cormack now, he's moving on to his 4th manager. So his track record is appalling in being a key decision maker, you would have to assume, in the appointment of all these managers. And if I was an Aberdeen fan, I'd be relieved that Barry Robson is gone because there was no future in that. But I'd be petrified as to who they were going to come up with next. And it's not just Dave Cormack; it's the full executive function at that club. And I just kind of reminded myself of who were the runners and riders the last time, and there was a cast list of dozens. And obviously Barry Robson deserved to get the job at the time because he went on this winning run, which was very, very impressive. Mm-hmm. But they're now having to delve back into that world, which was the list of names was uninspiring. Barry Robson dug them out of a hole by winning those games and making that decision an easy one. Turned out to be the wrong one, but you could understand absolutely why they made it at the time. Now they're going to have to go back in, and you're looking at Neil Lennon and Paul Lambert and Danny Cowley and all these guys. Ricardo Rodriguez, who's just joined to the fantastically named Wuhan 3 towns in China. But so we're going to hear all of these names again. They're cast back into this world of uncertainty amid an awful lot of pressure. Who are they going to come up with next? You'd have to worry.
Gary, when Barry Robson was given the job full-time after that excellent run he went on as interim manager, I don't remember there being too many dissenting voices, but you're much better placed to have gauged that than probably either of us. So, I mean, was it the right appointment at the time, did you feel?
I'm going to give you quite a long answer to this because I think it's important because it goes back again to what we just spoke about, is the structure above the manager's seat. We've been told now since Dave Cormack took charge at Pittodrie that, we're a forward-leaning football club in the sense that we've tried to emulate what a lot of clubs in Europe will do in terms of having, a director of football and a head coach type environment, head of recruitment, and all that good stuff happening. So you're taking the day-to-day running of the club away from it being a one-man show, which is kind of what Derek McInnes had at Aberdeen. Derek McInnes ran the roost over Pittodrie completely. And that makes sense. I think it's a sensible thing to do. But then what that means for me is that you need to be always planning 1 or 2 steps ahead of yourself. And so, this is now the 3rd season that Stephen Gunn, for example, has been in the director of football hot seat. This is his 3rd appointment, technically speaking, that the manager reports into him. Do we have a plan in place for this? Because a club that runs itself in the way we purport to last time around should have had a list of targets ready to go. Patently, that wasn't the case. And we ended up in a situation then when Barry went on the run. And it became very, very difficult then for the club not to give him the job at that point. But if we had the succession planning in place, there's an argument to suggest that Barry never got to that stage and we never backed ourselves into that corner. And that's the big concern I have right now is, again, and every time that we've talked about doing this, we're meant to have this philosophy and strategy in place. If you look at the appointments, Stephen Glass, a rookie manager, you could see what Stephen was trying to do, but I don't think he was backed appropriately from a recruitment perspective. Jim Goodwin came in. Jim Goodwin's track record never screamed out a guy who would fit the model and the strategy and the philosophy that we purported to have. So that got ripped up all over again. And then Barry came in and did something completely different as well. So there's no coherence at all about what we do as a football club at this moment in time. And that's the biggest concern I've got right now. Barry Robson, it's a crying shame Barry's lost his job. A cup-winning player for Aberdeen, had done well with our under-18s, had been groomed, I think, for this role at some point. It's not worked out. Barry's just a symptom of a much bigger problem at Aberdeen Football Club right now.
I just wonder where it went wrong. I mean, clearly that run at the end of the last season, or the second half of last season, was a very positive one. He did make a positive impact when he took over. So is it down to partly the recruitment over the summer, or have his tactics drastically changed from last season? What is it that's really gone wrong there?
I think the thing for me as well would be when Barry came in at the end of last season, he very quickly made us difficult to beat. We stopped conceding silly goals and we were combative. We didn't play particularly good football if you go back and look at it. And I remember us talking on our show when he was given the job about how does Barry now adapt his style to marry up with what the club's philosophy and strategy is meant to be, because, okay, we were winning games, but it wasn't tying up with what we were expecting to be seeing. And the truth of the matter is he just simply hasn't done that. What's gone wrong this season, I think there's elements about the recruitment. I don't think the recruitment's been as good this season as it had been last season. I think Barry's not made the use, though, of his squad. He's got a big squad and a decent squad to play with. And the style of football's been awful. Like, if you talk to any Aberdeen fan this season, and it's as galling as an Aberdeen fan to listen to pundits on Sports Scene or whatever talk about us as long ball merchants. But we deservedly had that tag this season.
I think losing McCrory, Scales and Pollock, they were the kind of part of the bedrock of the recovery under Robson. Yeah, as Gary says, the football was not particularly easy on the eye, but there was a solidity there. There was a foundation there. And that foundations have been whipped away and there's been no kind of solidity there at all. So I don't know. I look at Aberdeen playing and I don't know what they're trying to do. And I don't actually know what the club is trying to do. I mean, Gary, you referred to this earlier on. I look at what is the identity of this team? What are they attempting to do? What type of football are they trying to play? What's their DNA?
I was just, can you imagine where they would be without Bojan Majowski as well this season? I mean, he's been phenomenal, but he's been a real shining light, one of the very few. So Peter Leven has been asked to take training, according to the statement, for the moment. You've got to imagine, in terms of the timescale, that they're not going to get someone in ahead of Saturday when Celtic come calling, and maybe not even before they play Rangers next midweek. In some ways, for Peter Leven, I guess that's it is a thankless task, but he's got nothing to lose. But you've got to feel for him being put in that position as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's difficult. Obviously, he was brought in by Barry as well, be part of his coaching setup this season. It's interesting, the wording in the statement, all they're saying is to lead training on an interim basis, which, there's an inference there potentially that they've got somebody in mind to come in and actually take the team for the next 2 games. But then if they have got somebody lined up, would you want those 2 as your first 2 games to be coming in on in a team that's really struggling just now? Probably not. So it'll be interesting to see what we do now, I think.
Tom rhymed off a few names earlier, Gary. Have you got names in your head that you would like to see as kind of realistic potential appointments?
Not really right now, and I think this is the biggest challenge that the club have got. I don't think there's anybody that's a standout candidate in the Premiership. I would, and I said this last year, when we were in this place before, I would like to see us be brave with our managerial appointment this time around. I would like to see us try and look beyond the kind of the borders of Scotland and try and see if we can find somebody who can come in and kind of really excite the fans with a brand of football that gets us off our feet or gets us onto our feet, and is winning games. And there were some names out there last year who I think were probably achievable, but they've all gone on to other things now. what would be interesting, and in the statement today as well, they talk about the fact that we're in their player trading model, which is allowing us to invest significantly in the future. We've spent good money on players in the last 2 seasons. It would be good to see us spend some money now on a manager, I think.
Tom, I was just thinking from a manager's perspective, if you're a manager out there, I mean, I guess there's guys who are out of work who might jump at the chance of managing a club like Aberdeen. But if you look at their recent hire and fire strategy, you're not going to go in there with any great confidence, are you, that you're going to be backed if things don't immediately go well?
No, you're not. And if you're a manager of any kind of substance, you're looking at that, and you're looking at the churn, and say why. That's 3 managers in a row now. Why? Well, if you include 4 with Derek McInnes, right at the end, obviously he was there for a long time and was successful, but they've worked their way through a lot of managers, and anyone worth his salt is going to want to ask questions about that. That would be concerning for them. Like, there's no excuse for Aberdeen to be caught on the hop here. Barry Robson has been struggling for quite a while. Everyone knows it. Fans have been talking about it. Media has been talking about it. The hierarchy of that club have seen it. So if they haven't had quiet discussions, emergency options, what happens if this does not improve? If they haven't had those discussions over a period of weeks, if not months, then they're not doing their job properly. They don't. I mean, that's not absolutely disloyal to Barry Robson. That's just saying, okay, what happens? What happens if we want him to kick on and recover? But what happens if he doesn't? That's not a properly functioning club if they haven't had those conversations, and if they're not ready with a list of 3, 4, 5 people that they want to go to quickly.
Gary, a name I put to you earlier, and let's explore this again, was that of the man who came and took a point from Pittodrie, and he's got a long-standing relationship with the club. Tony Docherty, he's not long in the door at Dundee. He's done a fabulous job. Would he be a viable prospect, do you think?
Possibly. I must admit, I was impressed with the way Dundee played last night. Although I'm not entirely sure if that's just because I'm so used to watching really dire football this season that maybe anything that looks remotely coherent impressed me. But no, Tony Docherty's doing a fantastic job at Dundee. Credit to the Dundee board, who obviously took a bit of a risk on taking him for his first managerial gig by himself. I kind of suspect that if Tony hadn't been here already with Derek, he'd maybe be a bit more of a viable candidate right now. I think there's probably still guilt by association, so to speak, just because of the way that everything finished up with Derek and Tony before. But who knows? As Tom said, I've got very little confidence right now that the board have actually got any real plan in mind right now. Yeah, that would be worrying, but we'll soon see over the next few days. I mean, Gary, just to maybe wrap up then, that in the short term, i.e. just like for this season, and then maybe looking a bit further beyond that, what do you see as the kind of priorities for the new manager, and what would constitute success for them? I think realistically, third place is gone. Third place was gone a long, long time ago. I think now for Aberdeen, if we can get our way back into the European places and finish the season in Europe, that would be a success from where we're currently sitting right now. And then, a run in the Scottish Cup. We've obviously had a couple of favourable draws now, away at Clyde and then Bonnyrigg Rose up next. Obviously, I don't want to speak too soon about that given events last season. But, there's an opportunity there for us to go on a run. Obviously, we got to the League Cup final already, so, the Scottish Cup should be a viable target. It's been 34 years since we last took the Scottish Cup back to Aberdeen, which is far too long. So, hopefully somebody could potentially look at doing that. But success is probably getting back into Europe, I think, is the short answer. I
think it's worth mentioning that Aberdeen are failing badly in a very poor league. Like, this is a poor league. This is as poor a league a standard. Not to be kind of coming over all Derek Adams here, but the quality this season has been really, really poor, and Aberdeen are not up to the mark. So I don't think it would, given the resources they have at the club, the player pool that they have at the club, which is decent, I don't think it would take Jurgen Klopp to drive this team forward and get them into the top 6, top 5, maybe top 4. There's not a lot of stellar opposition out there for them to navigate their way through if they get the right manager. And that is a ginormous if.
It is, yeah. So they're currently 8th, but they are only, 5 points behind 5th place St Mirren, a couple of games in hand. Having said that, they're only 5 points above 11th place Ross County. So, it could go either way for Aberdeen, but we'll certainly see, and you'll hear all about it across BBC Scotland's platforms. But my thanks this lunchtime to both Tom English and Gary Scott. Thank you for listening. There'll be no normal podcast tomorrow, but we'll be back first thing on Friday morning with a bumper, or we hope, transfer window special. If you haven't done so already, subscribe and follow the Scottish Football Podcast so you don't miss an episode. Bye for now.
The winter transfer window is braving the British weather and is wide open once again.
More drama, more twists, more turns.
I am Kay Curd, and every weekday throughout January I'll be joined by Luke Edwards and some of the country's best football journalists to dissect the day's transfer rumours.
From BBC Radio 5 Live, the Transfer Gossip Daily Podcast.
Who will your team buy, sell, loan, or even just be heavily linked with, only to lose out to your rivals?
What will happen next?
Keep up to date with all the comings and goings straight from the rumour mill with the Transfer Gossip Daily Podcast. Listen on BBC Sounds.